I now have the honor of introducing our keynote speaker, Brian Requarth. Brian is the co-founder of Latitude and author of Viva the Entrepreneur. Before founding Latitude, Brian was co-founder and CEO of Viva Real, a Brazilian real estate marketplace that began with 2 people and grew to over 500 employees with tens of millions of dollars in revenue. As an angel investor, Brian has invested in over 50 startups in Brazil and Latin America. And he recently started Latitude, a new project focused on helping early stage founders build iconic companies. Welcome, Brian, and thank you for being with us today.
Thank you so much for the invitation. It's really an honor to be here and keynote this event. Y pues muchas gracias por estar aquí con ustedes, ¿no? Personas de varias partes de la región, el México, Caribe, Centroamérica, Suramérica. Não vou esquecer meus amigos brasileiros, não? O país onde nasceu minha filha. Mon français est terrible. That's all I got for French. But listen, it's really a pleasure to be here. And I know that, many of you, expected, maybe to get together and share with colleagues across the region, making new friends, and I'm sure that happens, sharing business ideas. But in case you don't remember what that looks like, I'm just going to remind you quickly. Everyone kind of remember what this was like, where we'd all kind of be together and there's some social interaction? Well, guess what? You adapted very well and you did an incredible job. So congratulations for making this work and really just getting the most out of this program here at YLI. Now, it's looked a little bit more, I'd say a little bit more like this over the last, 4 months. I'm going to go ahead and put myself in a little box here, which, it's been incredible, the connections that you've made. And I want to, talk a little bit about, despite these challenges of this global backdrop, I remain optimistic. As entrepreneurs, optimism, that's really our superpower. Now, one of the constant mantras that I had in building my business was adapt and overcome. It's the soundtrack to entrepreneurship because there's so many obstacles that we face in our journey. Now, in this short time we have together, I want to talk about the power of community and how it helps people adapt and overcome. Difficult moments can slow us down. They can force us to change, but ultimately we adapt and overcome. Entrepreneurs, we're inevitable. Now, about 5 years ago, I moved back to my hometown of Santa Rosa, California, after 13 years of living abroad, 2 small children, my wife. We decided to move back to California and be closer to my parents, who are actually on this Zoom call because they're excited for me to present here. Now, shortly after moving back, I was sleeping one night. I was jolted awake by a thundering sound of bang, bang. Who could this possibly be at 3 in the morning? I was wearing nothing but my boxer shorts, and I grabbed my 7-iron golf club as my fight or flight response took over, and I kind of peered out the window. And I could see my neighbor. She was frantic. She was in her bathrobe. And, I opened the door. She motioned for me to come outside. And she was talking 1,000 kilometers a minute. And so, I wiped the sand out of my eyes when she, pointed in the direction. And I'm going to show you what I saw. It was pretty intense. So this is what I saw. Now, this orange glow you're seeing. I had trouble processing what was going on in that moment. I couldn't understand what was happening. I wiped the sand out of my eyes, kind of like I'm doing right now at 7:30 in the morning here in California. And what we were seeing here, these were wildfires, and they were in all directions. So if I look to the left here, I look to the right, wildfires everywhere. And it was a pretty intense feeling. Now, we were one of the lucky ones, and we fortunately did not lose our home, but many friends lost their homes, and it was a tough thing for our community. This Tubbs fire, it ravaged our city. I'm going to briefly show you a few images of kind of the before and after of what our community was faced with. This is the downtown area, or a highly concentrated residential area. And you can see the before, all these residential homes, and the after. So this was devastating. You know, this is an important landmark in my town, gone. My high school burned down. Walking through a neighborhood, just destruction. This was hard. It was a hard situation. Now, I learned a lot from this experience, this horrific disaster, particularly about the power of community. Besides the frontline people fighting fires, you know, we saw volunteers organizing food drives, families opening up their homes, and communities coming together. It was inspiring. It was hard, but it solidified my understanding of just how resilient people can be. You know, we as a people, we're resilient. The stronger the hardship, the stronger the people. And entrepreneurs in particular are forced to develop resiliency. In the face of adversity, entrepreneurs turn up. Obviously, the severity of a wildfire or any natural disaster like this, we can't compare that to entrepreneurship. But it does feel like chaos sometimes. As entrepreneurs, there's something that bonds us all together. Building a business, it's an emotional roller coaster. I often say that your best day and your worst day, sometimes that's the same day. So what does that mean? Well, for one example, I remember being named Entrepreneur of the Year in Brazil. It should have been the best day ever. But the reality was that lightning had struck our building, fried our network, and rendered us without internet for days on end. And I felt like we were being a bit wasteful with some of the venture capital we'd raised. So here I was standing in front of my esteemed community, you know, sharing this moment that was supposed to be special. And I couldn't even string together a few words to thank everyone for the recognition. Entrepreneurship, it's hard and it's lonely. It doesn't matter if you're from Toronto, Canada, Kingston, Jamaica, Quito, Ecuador, it's always hard. I decided to build my company in Latin America, knowing it could be even a little bit harder. In 2003, I got in my car and I drove from California to Costa Rica. So crisscrossed many of the countries where you live. I saw Honduras, I saw Guatemala, Belize. And, you know, it was an amazing experience, an incredible journey. I slept on dirt floors. People graciously took me in. People that didn't even have much, but they were so open and willing to give me food and shelter. And it was inspiring. It was humbling and inspiring at the same time. But it made me fall in love with the region. And speaking of love, on that same trip, I went down to Colombia to visit my long distance girlfriend, now wife, Andrea, finally meet her family. She likes to say that she imported me to Colombia. And, you know, I wanted to meet the family. And initially, I shacked up in this crappy motel in a pretty sketchy part of Bogota. And now, for those from Latin America, I thought motel meant the same thing it does in the United States, just a lower end hotel. But for those that don't know, essentially it's a place that you rent by the hour. Now, I didn't know that at the time. It was just the cheapest thing that I could find. So, however, if I was going to stay in Colombia for a while, I knew that I needed a better apartment. So I picked up the newspaper to see what I could find in the classifieds. And there was one ad that looked promising. So I called the agent up, who proceeded to tell me, oh, I've got the perfect property for you. So we met at a cafe and we sat down. He pulled a piece of paper out of his briefcase. It had 15 property listings on this piece of paper. And he said, the place you're looking for is definitely on this list. And I was ready to go. I said, thanks, let's check it out. And then he kind of looked at me and he wagged his finger like this. He said, no, 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 no. That's going to be 20,000 pesos. It wasn't a lot of money. It was only about $10 at the time. But it was the same amount that I'd been paying per night to stay at that motel. And really, frankly, I was just kind of annoyed and grumpy that there was someone trying to charge me at all for nothing more than information. So I reached out of my pocket, gave him the money, and the day turned out to be a total waste. The first place I visited, already rented. The second place, too big. Third place, too expensive. So I came away empty-handed that day. So even though I struck out, it turned out to be a blessing in disguise, because my frustration with the process was what inspired my business. There's got to be a better way, right? So I decided to build a central repository of real estate information and inventory so that those property searchers could find everything in one place. And that's how Viva Real got started in Colombia, later moving our operation to Brazil. And I remember people would ask me oftentimes, where are you from? And I would, let them know that I'm from the Bay Area here in California. And they would respond and look at me funny and say, wait, isn't that where the Silicon Valley is? Isn't that where all that tech stuff happens? And it's true. It's the epicenter of tech. But I believe that founders outside the United States, it may be counterintuitive, but you have an unfair advantage. You have a chance to stand out and change a lot of lives, to solve big, real problems instead of making marginal improvements. You have huge markets, and resilience because complexity. And complexity can sometimes be a beautiful thing to embrace. Big players from other countries, they're going to think twice about expanding and having to deal with it, or it'll take them twice as long to tame that market. And there's a quote that I liked from a friend named Gigi Levy, who's a well-known investor and venture capitalist from Israel. And he says, if I'm playing chess with someone and I can move my pieces twice to my opponent's one move, I can beat a grandmaster. And so speed is very important. Now, it seems crazy to even think you'd start an apartment search anywhere but the internet these days. In fact, real estate marketplaces, they already existed in the United States at the time, but it wasn't as developed in Latin America. No one wanted to come in and get their hands dirty, but that's just one example of the enormous opportunities that the region offers. And guess what? Venture capitalists are starting to take note. There's a lot more capital coming into Latin America, people willing to bet on those resilient types like yourselves. Yet rejection, it's inevitably going to come. It happens. In my case, I sold my company for nearly $600 million. But when I was trying to fundraise for my first round of capital, I heard over 30 no's consecutively. This shook my confidence, which, if I'm being honest with myself, wasn't that great to begin with. I thought that because I never took business classes, I wouldn't have as much success as my peers. Often it seems like everyone you meet in tech, they either went to Stanford or they went to Harvard. Seriously, there was a moment that I remember, a period where every single business person I encountered came from one of those business schools. And for some reason, I thought that I couldn't talk to an investor and be on the same level as everyone else. That was until I found an early believer. The investor who signaled to the market, hey, this guy here, you know what? He's worth paying attention to. His name was Greg Waldorf. And guess what? He has an MBA from, you guessed it, Stanford. He's still part of my close personal network, one of the people I turn to when I need support. And one day I decided to share this insecurity with him. I remember it very distinctly. It's one of those conversations where you can kind of transport yourself to where you were when you had the conversation. And I remember he told me, Brian, 10 times out of 10 times, I'd rather invest in someone with your scrappy mindset than any MBA student. So here you all are, learning from US-based companies, but guess what? They have a lot to learn from you too. Colombia, and Brazil made me that scrappy entrepreneur. And that's something that business schools won't teach you. Besides, I can bet that the vast majority of students at fancy MBAs, they're going to agree that the experience was worth it, not necessarily because of the classes they took, but because of the connections that they've made. Now, you've made some connections here, and your connections will get you through a lot. I'm going to give you an example. The stress of managing the transition of my company from CEO to chairman ended up putting me in the emergency room. I had a panic attack, but I literally thought I was having a heart attack at the moment. I was lucky to have a close group of other entrepreneurs to count on. And after telling them about it, I found out that they all had similar experiences. Now, had I stayed in the dark and not talked to them about it, maybe that wouldn't have been my last trip to the hospital. So I imagine you've built these strong bonds over the last 4 months, and you've built your own digital community here. So nurture them. Again, it's a really hard journey, and it's essential to have people who know what you're going through and you can be vulnerable with. I can't emphasize this enough. Have a community that will pick you up, help you rise from the ashes, because it's so critical. Now, these wildfires, they're tough. They happen, and they happen often. And it's a devastating thing for our community in many ways. But you know what? There's one remarkable phenomenon that follows every time. The baker's globe mallow. It's a specific flower which appears only after a fire. It's a gorgeous, rare hollyhock known for how it blooms out of burnt earth. Now, I see this flower as a symbol for how something beautiful can flourish, even out of the ashes of chaos. In times of uncertainty, these flowers will inevitably blossom, and they're results of their ecosystem, ever changing. And a lot's changing in the Americas. We can either sit idle on the sidelines and watch it happen, or be a protagonist in it. There's a Japanese concept that I absolutely love, and I use this at the end of the conclusion of my book. And so I thought it was appropriate to include it as a conclusion here. The word ikigai, it doesn't have a direct translation in any of the languages that we speak, but it essentially means reason for being. And the idea is that in order to figure out your purpose in life, you have to ask yourself 4 questions. 1, what do you love? 2, what are you good at? 3, what does the world need? And 4, what can you get paid for? In the middle of these 4 elements, that's your sweet spot. That's your ikigai right here. It's the intersection of passion, mission, vocation, and profession. Now, I bring this up at the end here because it's my belief that building a business is one of the most powerful accelerators for personal growth, and it's key for making a meaningful impact on society. And where you come from, that's even stronger. If you find your community, you'll be able to adapt and overcome. If entrepreneurship is your ikigai, your reason for being, you'll be inevitable. Thank you, IREX. Thank you, Wile. Thank you, the whole organization, Megan, Kristen, Carly. It's really a pleasure to be invited to speak at your conference, and congrats to all the fellows. Thank you for listening and making this region grow. And remember to stay scrappy, everybody. Thank you.